comfortably zoned with the Zigzag Man in Alameda, California, pushing on the doors of life marked pull and fighting the unholy trinity as we go. Big business, organized religion, and government.
I am back, and you are comfortably zoned with me, the Zigzag Man, Ralph Tyko, in Alameda, California, the northern part of the state, right across the bay from San Francisco. And I'm kind of flying high this morning for two reasons. First of all, the Mets clinched, the New York Mets, last night clinched a wild card position. They will be playing at home against either the San Francisco Giants or the St. Louis Cardinals on Wednesday. And given all of their injuries and what a up and down roller coaster crazy season it's been, it's kind of a miracle that it's gotten this far. And one of my buddies, my Goomba, my godfather from Connecticut, is with us to talk about the Mets a little bit and his special gripe. And he's always got the microphone and comfortably zoned to talk about whatever he wants from Connecticut. Tony D'Angelo. Welcome back, Tony.
And thank you, Ralph. And, it's funny, truth be told, we had a couple of takes to get the episode started, and
I had 1,050 takes to get these episodes started. Are you kidding me?
And I think that we're so conditioned to perfection in trying to get this exactly right. And as well we should. We take a lot of pride, mutually in what we do. But if you were like me, you used to watch those NFL films broadcast from the 1960s and the 1970s, narrated by John Facenda out of Philadelphia, otherwise known as the Voice of God. And there's a tape circulating. You can watch this on YouTube. It'll put you on the ground, of John Facenda and all the many takes that he would do to get just a clear flow to narrate the films. And he's cursing in Italian, and he's doing it with operatic glissandos. It's so fun. And I sit and I say to myself, well, if he can do that, then so can I, and so can you.
Right. I don't think perfection is next to my name in the dictionary. But I do like to get some things right, for crying out loud.
Well, exactly. As Ralph Cramden said, every dog has his day.
Yes, absolutely. So, Tony, tell me, first of all, your impressions before we get to what you want to talk about. Quickly, your impressions of the Mets season. What surprised you? What didn't surprise you?
It's my first thought was Terry Collins, and for all of the complaints and whatever you want to call it, criticisms, and the way that Met fans look at him, of like he's almost like an interloper, or he didn't do this right, and it's time we got somebody in who's really going to shape this team up. And the cry on New York sports radio for years now has been, bring back Wally Backman. Somehow Wally Backman is thought to be the reincarnation of Billy Martin. And, Wally's going to get this team into shape, and they're going to win, and they're going to win all the time, and, we're going to kick everybody's tail. And I am, as you know, with all of his faults, I'm a huge Billy Martin fan. Billy Martin did things on a ball field that, amaze me to this day, and his perception of the game was magnificent. Much more so than the managers of today, some of whom are good people. I'm not going to criticize them all. But, Billy didn't need the replay rule, and Billy didn't need the pitch counts, and Billy didn't need how the wind was blowing and the sabermetricians and all that. He knew where the game was, but Billy couldn't manage today. Billy would be, they'd probably take him away in chains or something. He'd be so hurtful and terrifying to the players. And Terry Collins, to his credit, has taken this team to the postseason twice, and he has bridged this gap, and he's represented the team well. And, congratulations to Terry Collins. That's my thought. In today's world, in today's baseball world, which is more complex, not necessarily for good reason, but certainly more complex. And he's done he's done a really great work here, and he is to be congratulated.
Well, that's very well said. You didn't congratulate Alderson, so leave that.
Yeah,
he's
2 years in a row. You're absolutely right.
Yeah. I think you talked about Billy not being able to manage. I think the tide shifted around Billy Ball when general managers became what is perceivably the winner of the power trip between the two. It's always been back and forth. Weiss, Stengel, Sheffing Bearer, I remember that very distinctly. The relationship between a general manager and a manager was perfected, I think, by Sabian and Bochy, in our era. But Billy Ball called for a weaker manager. Billy Beane had a weaker manager than in Ralph Howe than they did in L.A. with Scioscia. And it's very interesting. Sometimes the general manager gets the credit, sometimes the manager. We're in an era where general managers are getting most of the credit. And I think that's why a guy like Billy, who had opinions of his own and would fight the fight for his players, a guy like that will never see again managing. It's just become too corporate. Billy, Wally Bachman, they're considered to be loose cannons. And it's becoming a business. Not that it always hasn't been a business, but it's become so strictly sterile and, to the point where nobody has individuality in any way. Their uniform, the way they wear their uniforms, the way they wear their caps, everything is absolutely uniform. And I think that takes away something from the game.
Well, I tend to agree with you, and it's gone from a team game to a game of individuals and stats and performances, and I think a lot of that is like the whole fantasy thing. Assemble your team based on player performances, and we'll machinate it together, and we'll slice it and dice it and shake it and bake it, and we're going to do this all in terms of individual player performance, where I grew up in an era of watching Joe Garagiola on the Game of the Week talking about how a team wins a game. And Joe would always talk about the intangibles of baseball. Ralph Kiner in New York would always talk about the vicissitudes of baseball. Ralph Kiner would always have his running tour dictionaries. We didn't know what the heck he meant, but he taught us a few words. But all of that kind of being as it is, baseball is, regardless, a game of intangibles. You win the game by the team playing well and by the team doing things, not by individual performance. And baseball is a team game. A sacrifice rather than a swing away, a bunt rather than a hit, stealing the sign, when to do that. These are things that, going back to Joe Garagiola, they don't fit in a box score, but they win you games.
Absolutely. Can you get the runner over? Can you advance the runner? Can you hit to right field and get the guy over to third base? Can you beat the shift? Can you do the little things? Can you turn the double play when the guy's bearing in on you in the clutch? All those things.
Well,
it's a great game, Tony.
For certain, regardless of what they try to do to it, you're absolutely right. But like in following Vin Scully closely during his last year, I made sure that I heard every single broadcast that he did because, we're never going to see his like again, and that's really the sad thing. Dick Enberg, too, is leaving us, another one of the great announcers. But Vin Scully, when the Colorado Rockies were having their tail handed to them by the Los Angeles Dodgers, would say two things repeatedly. The first thing he would say is he didn't see any Colorado Rockies advanced scouts sitting in the seats reserved for scouts. Now, because he said the advanced scout's job would be to pick up what the Dodger pitchers are doing so that they'll know how to approach their trips to the plate. And it's like, and he said, this is fundamental baseball, and in his very gentlemanly, courtly way, he was saying, what the freak is wrong with these guys, And the other thing he would also talk about, which I personally love to hear because, playing baseball as a catcher in years gone by, you watch these catchers today, Zig, and it's terrible. They don't shift. They don't move with two hands. They don't block the ball. They don't fake like Johnny Bench used to do. Johnny Bench had the best first to third fake I ever saw. They kind of play catcher like a lazy first baseman, and Scully would consistently repeat the teachings of Roy Campanella at Vero Beach in the wheelchair, talking to the young Dodger catchers about this is how you catch. You shift. You moved with the pitch. You mix up the signals, and it's just things like that in baseball. I think, it's, I'll sit and I'll watch my games on MLB on the computer. I'll just start screaming at it. My poor wife doesn't know what's happening. It just drives me crazy.
Did I lose you?
No, I'm here.
Oh, good. Tony, you have the take that you wanted to get on this show on. I find it to be so incredibly interesting. You have a rant going, and from anyone else, it would sound like a rant. From you, it sounds like a composition. Because you're so well composed. You don't rant. You verbalize, and that's why I'm delighted to have you. But go for it in this case.
Well, last week we lost a brilliant young pitcher by the name of Jose Fernandez. And I would think, Vin Scully would talk about it, the story of his coming to America from Cuba, on and on and on, and what a remarkable story it was, and just what a remarkable young man that he was. And, got my attention. It's nice to hear a story of someone beating insurmountable odds to come into what is still, in its perverted, twisted, confused state someday, still a great land of opportunity, and to do something incredibly wonderful. And we awoke to the news last Sunday, of his premature demise. And the first thing that I thought to myself was, and this is, as you know, I have a cynical side. It's like, okay, what exactly took place here? And I watched the press conferences, and I watched the testimonies of the players, and they had lost one of their brothers, and that's a brutal thing to overcome. But yet, I said to myself, because I am of the belief that we as people control a lot of our destiny, and a lot of what we do, which is good or bad, is really, I'm a believer in that man has a free will. Man can use this free will, and he could use it, for good purposes or for bad. And yet, if man wants to think, he can do great things. If man wants to act stupidly, he will suffer the consequences. And believe me, I've acted stupidly in my life. I'm probably going to act stupidly tomorrow, but the choice will be my own. That's my point. And I get to, you read about the poor kid, and you read about his life, and you read about how he was going about his life, and I thought to myself, you got 25 guys in this ball club. You got a manager. You got coaches. Now, I'm not knocking the coaches, and I'm not bashing Don Mattingly. You know, it's like none of us are perfect. But did the light ever go on? And I don't say this pointing a finger, but did the light ever go on to like, hey, we got to keep an eye on this kid. You know, he's young. He's in a fool's paradise. He's in Miami. There's women. There's money. There's fast operators. Shh, you didn't hear that from me. And you know, there's all kinds of creepy people that want to get him to do things. And, you know, we should maybe send somebody around with him just to make sure that, you know, he doesn't get in the soup. And, you know, he's taking care of himself because he's a large part of our future, and he's a beloved part of what takes place here. And, you know, it like all the reading I've done, none of that took place. You know, they yelled at him a couple of times, hey, you know, you got to get your head on straight, as you do oftentimes with kids when they don't think properly. But it's like, you know, fellas, guys, ladies, you know, you have a rare talent here. And not only that, but he's a very impressionable human being. He is a boy in a man's body playing a boy's game. I mean,
right.
And that's, it really troubled me. You know, I mean, and it's like, you want to talk about further irritation. Senator Marco Rubio, a.k.a. Little Marco, wants to come out with a bill now to do something about the jetty. It's like, Marco, shut up and go home. The problem wasn't the jetty. The problem was the kid was out there on a boat going at high speed or max speed in the dark with his buddies, and they're being very quiet about the toxicology. You know, it's like...
Well, that's going to come out. And, you know, 23-year-old kid with a ton of money, can't blame the kid. But, you know, you say, should the team be looking after him? How about his agent? How about his business manager?
Well, that's just it. And
how about the union, for instance?
Oh, thank you very much. Yes.
Right? I mean, the union's supposed to protect the player. I haven't seen much of that in the last 10 years. I've seen a lot of union cover-ups. They cover up P-tests, this, that, and the other thing.
Yeah.
And I understand the making of the game and the business of the game, but the union and management work hand in hand. And I really don't think that the player's interests have ever been the player's interest as a human being as opposed to the player as a financial entity. They take good care of the players as financial entities. The minimum salary is like $250,000 a year.
I think it's $500 now, Zig.
Oh, is it really?
I think it's $500,000. Yeah. Geez, and not only that, but if you appear in a game, I'm here. But if you appear in a game, I mean, if you just get on, you know, you're called up as a pinch runner on the last day of the season, you will vest in the pension.
Really?
Yeah. It's amazing. If you want to get me started on another soapbox, of which I am not expert, but a friend of mine, Doug Gladstone, has done a lot of research on this. Ball players before, I'm going to say 1970. 1980. Because we've had the pleasure, Bob Lazari and I, talking to Carmen Fanzone, that's a fellow I've got to get you connected with. Carmen Fanzone of the Cubs and the Red Sox, who played third base for the Cubs, and he played in Hawaii. Also a fantastic trumpeter. He's now working for the Los Angeles Musicians Union, and he still plays the trumpet. He did play for the Baja Marimba Band. He played under Leo DeRocher. Fascinating guy. But he missed out on the pension by, I don't know, because it was a 5-year vesting then, maybe by a month or something, because they kept him playing in Hawaii because they didn't want him to vest. I mean, it's just absolutely incredible. Oh, and you really want to get me started on quote-unquote modern-day players. I mean, can we have one day's gate in Major League Baseball? We do Jackie Robinson Day. Yes, I understand that, and I understand what's behind it. And Mr. Robinson was a great, great man, and may his legacy continue. But can we have a day for the old players where the entire day's gate and all of the television revenue and all of the concession revenue goes into a private foundation as a benefit fund for these old players? I mean, one day's gate.
Not just players, people around the game who are needy.
Scouts.
That's the Major League charity basically fills a big void that a lot of folks don't know about.
Don't see.
They take care of a bunch of players, a bunch of groundskeepers, a bunch of ex-announcers, this, that, and the other thing. People around the game who are in destitute. But not nearly enough is done. I mean, if these guys are making $500,000 as a minimum, when I was a kid growing up, minimum salary was $6,000 a year. Now, you could take inflation into that, and you could times it by 6. 6 times 6 would be $36,000. Just, $6,000 in those days is $36,000 by today's standards.
Well, I often laugh.
How does that work out? That's craziness. From that standpoint, do I blame the players? Not at all, because the pendulum has shifted. If you remember how it was before Mr. Miller, Marvin Miller came along, and who, by the way, along with Gil Hodges, needs to be in the Hall of Fame.
Agreed.
Right now.
Agreed.
But the way it was, the other way, the owners were taking advantage of the players, and I wouldn't look to the owners to babysit the players, because the people that the owners put in charge of entire franchises are people like Tony La Russa, and God bless him, he's a tremendous manager, this, that, and the other thing. Oh, he had this, he had going for him. He himself is not qualified to manage 25 guys if you're talking about managing their personal lives or taking a part in their personal lives, trying to get them on the right track. People like, and I take a big shot at Tony La Russa, because he's a man who is looked on as an icon. And he let his players down in St. Louis. He, Kyle, a bunch of them. He should have, I don't even know how to end. Don't get me started on his enabling of the king of the steroids in the Bay Area.
And I mean, he was drunk and driving too.
Well, basically that. But he was an enabler of the game going south. And not that he was the only one, not that every major league owner and general manager and coach and trainer in the minors, they didn't all but know about it. He was the kingfish. Let's just put it that way. And,
well, you know what's amazing is
it was a disgusting era, and it's not over.
I was fortunate to go on one of the old Yankee Stadium tours before the old Yankee Stadium was unceremoniously torn down to build the new Yankee Stadium, something which troubles me to this day. That said, part of the tour was going into the locker room, the Yankee locker room, the place where Gehrig and Ruth and DiMaggio and Rizzuto and Barrett and Mantle all played. What struck me about the Yankee locker room, Zig, was you pictured this big, palatial thing with high ceilings and very comfortable accommodations. This was fundamentally a 1923 building. The ceilings were low. The cubicles were tiny. The hallways were small. The manager's office was way in the back. And we were kind of led into a little area, but yet we could see everybody's uniforms hanging up, and we could see the gloves, things like that. And I remarked to Bob Lazzari, who was on the tour with me, that given the size of this room, Bob, and given the fact that these are all very close quarters, you've got McNamee trucking in these steroids. You've got, all kinds of stuff happening here and there, and Giambi and everything else, and, Mr. Torrey never saw a thing. I mean, that's like saying I don't see your hands if I'm driving you if you're a passenger in my Volkswagen Beetle. I just didn't get it. It's like, how could you not? You would know if another person was in that room carrying something. Believe me, you would know it. It wasn't that big.
Right. It isn't, and in their eyes, you know what the situation is in a locker room between managers and players. There's a lot of stuff that a manager doesn't want to see, doesn't want to know about.
Right.
Can't. Really, yeah. If he knew, that would be the end. That's the type of thing. So
Bobby Valentine maintains to this day that he saw stuff happening in the Mets clubhouse, the whole thing with Radomski and all the stuff going back and forth there. And he went to Steve Phillips, who said, we can't say anything. He has mentioned that.
Mm-hmm.
Was I a fly on the wall? I can't tell you for certain, but this is what I have read, and this is what I've heard him say.
What is your biggest disappointment in the way baseball has evolved since you were a kid?
I'll try to keep that to the context of this day, or the amount of time remaining to the end of this day, Zig. But as I thought about it today, we have gone so far away from the concept of the team winning the game to a world of individuals. For example, and this one really stuck in my craw this morning. I'm a subscriber to the New York Times. I take what's in the New York Times these days with a grain of salt, but I still respect it. I still read it. I grew up reading the news, reading the New York Times on a student account, way, way, way back in Turner River Junior High School in Stamford, Connecticut. So to me, I still hold the old great lady with a certain degree of respect. Maybe a diminished one, but yet a certain one. And there was a very good article there about how the nerds of baseball want to micromanage the fielding of players, charting how they're fielding balls, if they're good, if they're bad, adding, quote-unquote, more value to the game. And I'm sitting there and I'm shaking my head reading this thing and getting angrier by the moment. I'm saying all this really does is focus on the individual. It does not focus about the concept of the team winning the game. For example, did a player drop a ball intentionally because there was a slow runner that was batting, and he wanted to get the fast runner off the bases in a tight game, moving from first to second? That type of a, whatever you want to call it, statistical scatter chart does not take those things into account. And it's all of this, whatever you want to call it, micromanaged fielding analysis is going to be used in more, contract negotiations and determining the value of fielders. I was remarking that Derek Jeter, and many devout Yankee fans had told me this, was if a ball was hit to his left, up the middle, oftentimes he wouldn't pursue it. He'd let it go into center field. And they would say, oh, that's terrible. He should dive. He should hustle. And, of course, he's not coming anywhere near it, and it's New York, and it's Derek Jeter, and they're not going to give him an error. He didn't touch the ball, so they give it as a hit. And the Yankee teams were good enough not to let the run go around. And I'm not going to condone a lack of hustle on his part, but many times I thought with Jeter was, do I, bust my tail and fall and break my forearm and, I'm out for 6 weeks? He may have been making that calculation at times on balls. That type of an analysis that I've just described does not take that into account. So it's, I'm back to Joe Garagiola again. What wins or loses a baseball game? The things you don't see in a box score.
Well, you surprised me about Jeter. I've never heard anything about Jeter short-arming a ball or this and that.
Yeah, I wouldn't say but yet he wasn't the type that, there were times he did, but then there's a lot of times, like over the middle, he didn't really, no, I'm not going to call him Reggie Jackson, who really took, the lazy man's right field to a whole new order.
Tony, let me ask you this question. When the Yankees got Rodriguez, he was a shortstop, and he had much better range than Jeter.
Darn good one, yeah.
I think it came down to pacifying Jeter more than anything else.
Oh, well, that was clear.
Okay, so
that was clear.
Thinking just from a physical standpoint, they'd have been better off, I think, with Jeter at third and Rodriguez back in the day.
But you're back to a team concept there, Zig.
Sure. But now that comes down to when you're talking about a team concept, Jeter's your shortstop. They look to him, the locker room, the press, everything. It becomes almost do you gain by giving up something physically, giving up a physical advantage? Do you gain with an overall mental average of, hey, Jeter's your guy, the solid shortstop, where you don't have to make changes, where things are constant? It's a trade-off from that.
Well, and we were always taught, even with the big league clubs, you do what the team needs to do to win, and you give the team its best advantage. I'm often reminded of the fact that when Jerry Grody, who caught all the great Met pitchers, and probably, arguably, the best catcher of his era, maybe Randy Hundley. And people say Bench. Yeah, Bench was terrific, but these other two guys may have been better. It was a great time to watch great catchers in the National League. But when Grody was going to leave the Mets, Johnny Bench said, "Well, if he comes over here, I'm picking up my third base glove." That was the mindset. Whatever we need to do to win, if we get him catching certain days, I'm going to third base.
Right. Grody was a terrific catcher. You know who gets underrated a lot is a guy who I had on recently, an interview, Duffy Dyer.
Fine defensive catcher, yes.
Fine defense, and they didn't give up much offensively when he was in there. If anything, you can make a case with Duffy was
out of Arizona. Yeah,
a better hitter than Grody, and a supreme team guy. Never complained, never bitched. I talked to Timmy Haller the other day about the catching fraternity, such as it is. I had Hobie Landreth on and talking about that. Catchers root for each other. Like, you could be backing some guy up, and you'll be rooting for him, where that isn't really true in most other positions. So it's a very interesting game. I think catchers, a strong catcher, and this is why I'm amazed that the Mets won this year. D'Arnaud was horrible all through the year. Pilecki didn't come up big. The only defensive catcher that they have is Rivera, and he hadn't hit for a while. He's starting to hit a little bit. They are gelling, and I keep going back to them, an incredibly amazing story with all the injuries. Now I'm going to ask you this, too. This is, I've talked to a bunch of people. Given the number of injuries they've had, should the Mets take a long look at their training staff and their way of doing things Is this something?
Well, is that baseball's
system?
dirty little secret? You know, I mean, I am not an expert. I've done a little reading. I've talked to people more knowledgeable than I. And I don't want to cause suspicion or aspersion, but I do know that when one is using muscle enhancers and they stop, or steroids, the bones become very brittle. You know, and I wonder if, you know, there's, well, we're just going to, you know, like players today hurt their oblique. I never knew what an oblique was. You know, it's like
well, you know, you pulled your hip. Now they call it oblique.
Well, but I think the whole thing there is, and I think, you know, as you say, it might be a players' union thing. Don't get too close to these players' personal whatevers. You know, it's because there's a vested interest in at least making baseball appear clean for the masses.
Right.
Whether it's clean or not, they want it to appear clean. Of course, if it could be clean, that's one thing, but they certainly want it to appear clean. My little humble view from Pomfret, Connecticut. You know.
Okay. Well, you know, over the years, I've modified my view on my anger on how steroids, people like Bonds and Clemens, they ruin the record book. We can no longer compare era to era. But
and that was our barometer.
Yeah, right. But I've been taught to believe that we could never, even in the past, compare era to era because a number of things. First of all, Ruth played in a league where there were no blacks to play against. Mm-hmm. Makes a big difference. For instance, would his stats be that incredibly great if he had Josh Gibson to compete with, for instance, for a batting title, or you know what I'm saying? There was the dead ball era. There's this, that, and the other thing. Given all that, I will accept that the game has been tainted by steroids, but certainly Bonds was coming up against pitchers who were taking steroids as well. Problem with all of that, and it gets back to the injury, is by building up an incredible amount of muscle mass, you're putting a strain on tendons and ligaments that you can't build up. They're just natural. And I think that's where a lot of these injuries come from. That's why Mark McGwire was injured as much as he was. The bulk of weight put on his feet and this, that, and the other thing, you can't build up your feet to hand, you know, there's no exercise for that. So with it, a player's career is affected both positively and negatively. What isn't common knowledge, or it should be common knowledge by this time, is the tremendous amount of physical negativity, the negative effects on a body takes from taking steroids, how it tears down your system, kills your kidneys, your liver, this, that, and the other thing. So we're going to see the long-term effects as these players get older and as bad things happen, which will put all the players' unions' gains into proportion when players start dying at a young age. You know, they died with a lot of money in the bank, but they were 53 years old, that kind of thing.
You know, and I often
it ain't worth it. And it makes us think about the importance of money, you know, that's put on society and how people breed their kids to be players, and they have Tommy John surgery in high school. Mm-hmm. That's all right. They'll come back. They'll be stronger. You know, it's crazy. It's a crazy world based on greed.
It's ridiculous, and you know, Ken Caminiti, whom I think of, you know, who was having all the drug issues, and baseball saw him, and they saw what he was for lack of a better term, involved with or messing around with, and did nothing. And one day, to use Garagiola speak again, the poor man wakes up dead. It's like, well, gee, what a tragedy. No, folks, you had a problem here. Something is wrong.
I'll ask you this. Are you happy with the new commissioner? Do you think strides are being made that are positive?
I think he's done a very good job from a PR standpoint of quote-unquote stabilizing or representing the brand. What I do not like about him is he seems like someone who will, I don't want to use the word tamper, but I'll say alter fundamental parts of the game in order to make a more saleable product. And I think that's what commissioners do these days. I think Roger Goodell is very much like that. Say what you want about him. Say what you want about the terrible things happening with the women associated with football players getting beaten up and all that. But Roger Goodell makes a ton of money for his owners, and Manfred to me is like that. He is an owner's commissioner.
Right. I contribute the high preponderance of domestic abuse to the anger caused by steroids. Steroids will affect your mind.
Good old roid rage, yeah.
Roid rage is, I see that with the cops in this country. I mean, it's epidemic with them, the anger, and I think it's all based on steroids, to go back to it. And if baseball has a problem with steroids, wow, football has no problem because they placate. You could do steroids because you're out 3 or 4 games and you're back, and that's cool. And a lot more study needs to be done as to the effect on steroids from a psychological standpoint, not just a physical standpoint. I think that's the cause of most of the domestic problems. And steroids aren't just football and baseball, basketball too. I'm sure hockey is going through it. It's is what it is. So, what's next for baseball? What's going to turn this around? Is there I'm sorry, I interrupted. I'm sorry. I was just going to ask you if there's anybody out there that you consider to be a visionary that's up and coming, that has some ideas, besides yourself, of course.
Anyone out there I consider to be a visionary. I think there are a lot of people in the front office who are young and have good ideas of promoting baseball as a business, which of course it is. I do not see, which concerns me, any advocates for purism in baseball. We're going to see pitchers pitching at shorter intervals. A complete game is going to be something the equivalent of a perfect game, I think, as time goes on. We're not going to see teams building loyalty within a given city over a course of years because the players constantly chase the highest dollar. We are not going to see media people being I'm not going to use the word critical, but scrutinizing the performances of managers. Classic example of that to me this year has been Dave Roberts with L.A. I think he's a great guy. I think he has a great camaraderie with the players. I think he's a great motivator, but his moves during a game, and he's having one of those years. He'll burn through his pitching staff. He'll send the wrong pinch hitters up at the wrong times, and you'll shake your head, but somehow they find, a winning to that. And you don't really see the writers, Dave Roberts, great guy, is managing great, and it's like I come from a time when Dick Young was writing for the New York Daily News, and Gil Hodges, and you know how I feel about Gil Hodges, was managing the Mets. And Dick Young would write these columns. They weren't disparaging to Gil, but they were absolutely true about, if you watched a lot of Met games in those years that I did, was Mets were, with the good pitching, it was a 1-0 game or a 2-1 game, and, somehow the Mets would figure out a way to win. It was a pass ball or, an error or, the wind at Shea takes the ball down the line or something, and the Mets end up winning 2-1 or something. And this would happen repeatedly and repeatedly. Tom Seaver would leave a lot of games, 1-0, 2-1, pitching his guts out, and didn't get the decision. The club just didn't hit. But yet Hodges, for some reason, was the beneficiary of a lot of good tidings when he was a manager. And I mean, I'm not saying it was pure dumb luck. Branch Rickey would say luck is the residue of design. This is Hodges, and this is what he did. But Dick Young would say, hey, Met fans, you think this is a great team and they're winning entirely because they're just overpowering? And now there's a lot of, whatever you want to call it, good luck or good fortune here. And at one point he said, Gil Hodges probably takes his team out to Belmont Park and they roll around in the horse stables. I mean, it wasn't really said, but yet it was the kind of thing that you read it and you thought, hey, this is a real world. And, baseball was, you can have the best team and not win the game and kind of keep this in perspective. But today it's like you don't see writers doing that at all, making analysis of players and their weaknesses. It's like they're almost afraid to do that. They get on the bad guy list or something. And that's what I really miss. And I don't see those kind of people in baseball anymore, and that's what concerns me.
Well, I'll tell you what about Dick Young. He was the one guy we get up in the morning and we want to know what Dick Young had to say. Mm-hmm. He was the most read guy. Found out something recently. He was the first guy to do interviews with players after the game, to go into a locker room and interview players after a game. Dick Young.
Well, yeah, and, there's a very good tape. I don't know if you might be able to come across it of when Mays was playing for the Giants with Dick Young interviewing him. And Willie, after a game, he's kind of decompressing. Willie would play very excitedly, in that say hey kind of way. And Willie's trying to decompress after the game, and Dick Young's asking him questions. And Willie is being, polite with him, but in such a way as if you're being polite with your child when you don't want to give him a smack. It's really good if you get to see it. But yes, you're absolutely right.
Miss him. I want to make something clear too. He gets an awful lot of bad press for supposedly running Seaver out of town and influencing M. Donald Grant.
Yes.
And this, that, and the other thing. A lot of people don't know Seaver was signed to contract and was trying to renegotiate. Now, that's something that rarely is heard, but I'm not, by any means making excuses for Grant and saying that getting rid of Seaver was by any means good, but you can see ownership in a change. The game is changing. Free agency, this, that, and the other thing. A lot of resentments built up.
Well, and Grant, and we've talked about this in the past. The Mets were started. Bill Shea, God rest his soul, and this bunch of whatever you want to call it. Disgruntled millionaires at the Round Hill Country Club in Greenwich who wanted to bring National League Baseball back to New York. Donald Grant, Herbie Walker, the President Bush's uncle, Mr. Trask, Robert Trask, and Joan Payson. And
well, they're kind of forced into it because of Branch Rickey in the Continental League.
Well, that was just it, and that was brilliant on Bill Shea's part. But the whole thing was, Donald Grant was a Wall Street guy, wasn't a baseball guy as such, but he was Brown Brothers Harriman. And he lived in a world where men signed contracts, and, if you made a bad deal, you swore to your hurt, and you did better next time. And that's what troubled him. And he kept saying to the press, who didn't want to listen, this is going to open up the floodgates to where the players will start to run baseball, and the prices will get to where people can't afford it. I mean, a real stupid guy, right? He knew absolutely nothing. But you're absolutely right.
Yeah. Yeah, and that is exactly what happened. But again, the pendulum swung. If you go back to the way it was before free agency, you could be a terrific player, and you could be backed up in the minor leagues for 7 years behind a player, a Mattingly, somebody in your position is just not going to give it up. And there was no way to get out of your contract, to leave. It was the only game in town.
Well, so, there's a local story, or shall I say a Connecticut story, or a southwestern Connecticut story of Zeke Bella, who was the third-string catcher of the Yankees in the 1950s behind Silvera and Bear. Fine ball player, Dartmouth College, lived in Greenwich, one town over from where we lived, and wasn't going anywhere in that Yankee organization. And the sad story was one day Stengel came to him and said, "Hey, Zeke, we're going to put you in the outfield the second game of a doubleheader, so make sure you invite all your buddies down. They could, we'll buy some seats for them, and at least they can get to see you play." Oh, gee, thanks, Case. So first inning, they're playing, and Zeke is playing right field. And inning's over, and Zeke is running in. All of Zeke's people are standing up, yelling, "Hey, Zeke, here's Zeke." He's a New York Yankee, for crying out loud. And Zeke is waving as he goes in the dugout. And if you remember that old Yankee Stadium dugout, it was a very low-hung sort of thing, and the players had to duck to go in. Well, poor Zeke hits his head and knocks himself out cold. And they're carrying him out, and that was the end of poor Zeke's Yankee career.
One inning, and he's in front of all his friends, and he's
one bump to glory. It's so sad, but I think of that. This poor kid isn't going anywhere, for crying out loud, in that organization.
Hey, you mentioned somebody, Dick Enberg, his passing, and you and I have talked about old-time shows, old-time sports shows, television over the years. I can't tell you how much I loved the Dick Enberg quiz show.
A sports challenge. I was a big sports challenge fan.
Oh, terrific. Have, say, the Yankees against the Dodgers. You'd have DiMaggio, Heinrich, and maybe Bauer, for instance.
Yes.
Against the Dodgers. Clem Labine, Snyder, and maybe Erskine. So you get to know these guys a little bit. It was, first of all, it was the winter months. We were all Jones and Ball to begin with. And you get to know these guys, whether or not they were quick on the uptake, whether or not they had personalities. And Enberg was charming. He really
was.
Show.
Well, you know what amazed me on that show? You had the old fighters. You had Joe Louis, Archie Moore, and I think it might have been
Robinson. I think Ray Robinson was.
Ray Robinson, thank you. Those were the three. They were all huge baseball fans, and they were always marveling about Johnny Bench. Johnny Bench to them was the greatest thing that ever happened. Joe Louis would just go, He said that Johnny Bench man, he got that power. He says he got that short punch in his hands, and he knocks that ball. They were huge baseball fans, all of them.
Right. That was nice. Yeah, rest in peace, Dick Enberg. We didn't talk about. And before we go, we got to talk about the master of them all from standpoint of public relations and what he did for his sport. Arnold Palmer passed away same day Jose Fernandez did. And
yes, he did.
That got lost. He lived a great life. He was 87 years old. And I read a stat that he was making as much in 2015. He was like the third highest former athlete making bucks.
Well, you know, and credit Mark McCormick for that. I mean, Mark McCormick was, I think, I think out of Ohio, a lawyer turned insurance guy who really took the concept of sports agency to a whole new level. And Palmer was his first guy, and he was able to commoditize the whole, you know, whatever you want to call it, the likeness, the person, the character of a sports athlete, and make that a marketable commodity. You know, license pictures, go on TV. That really wasn't thought of before him, even though our mutual friend Evan Weiner did correct me this week, and he was absolutely right. There was an agent in the 1950s with the Yankees, Frank Scott, who would do things with the players. Frank Scott is mentioned, if memory serves, in the George Plimpton book, Out of My League, where he's pitching an exhibition before the All-Star game. And the players all crowd around Frank Scott to say, gee, how much money are we going to make here, Frank, if we, you know, participate in this stunt? But, you know, as far as making it a bigger enterprise, that was Mark McCormick, and, you know, really, which became the whole ING thing and later Voya, you know. So that was, and Arnie was the beneficiary of that.
Yeah. You mentioned Plimpton's book. Plimpton's book was
terrific.
He wrote a football book, too, about trying out for the Detroit Lions. The baseball book got very, very little coverage compared to that football book. But the baseball book was an insight. When I was growing, actually, I'm a little older than you, people like Garagiola, Brosnan, Pennant Race, Reckes, and Vick, I was talking about that book the other day. They gave us an insight as to what really went on inside baseball.
Without a doubt.
And that out of your league or out of their league was one of the ones that I remember. I remember him on the cover of that in a uniform that had no emblems. He didn't represent the blank uniform on the cover of that book. I remember that very distinctly.
There is he makes a comment in the book. He's getting ready to pitch in the second All-Star game, which, of course, they were doing 2 All-Star games to contribute back then to the Players' Pension Fund. And he needs a ball glove. And he goes to the sporting goods stores who are all selling, you know, football. You know, sorry, we don't have any ball gloves until next spring. So he laments about what happened to his old baseball glove, and he says he might have lost it on the field in Pomfret School. Now, Pomfret School is about 5 miles from where I'm sitting, the ball field. And every spring, it's sort of like my start to the baseball season. I walk the ball field in Pomfret School, and I kick around the woods in the hope that I will find this glove. It would mean so much to me if I did, you know.
Yes, I can imagine it would. You know, you used to fall in love with the writers and the authors of these books. They became our friends. You'd read a book, and the end of the book would mean like, wow, what now? It's just can't replace those memories. Can't replace. And we mentioned Brosnan. He passed away a few years ago. He wrote 2 books. One was Pennant Race, and one was Long Season.
Yes.
And I don't remember which book it was, but he give you an idea what it was to play in the major leagues. And here he's sitting in the dugout. It's a hot day. I think it was when he was with St. Louis. It must have been the Long Season. And here comes his wife. It's almost an empty stance. His wife is coming down with the kid that she brought to the game, and the wife couldn't handle it. you know, he's in the bullpen, and here she's coming, and she's having one of those days for whatever reason, and it just brought you to the fact that these people are human beings.
Vince Scully said for years, they're not wind-up dolls. They're people.
Right. And you look at this guy should be hitting now. Is he 320 or he's a 320 average or he's down to 280? And what's happening? Well, you never know what's going on at home. You never know what's going on with his love life, with his physical health, with his grandmother being sick, with his kid born, all these things. They're human beings. That's all they are. And we expect them to perform like machines, and they're not. And but it was just so funny to me. Just here comes the wife. he's about to be called in and what have you. So, how do you keep focused? And those who can keep focused and block out the world are often the most horrible of human beings because they do block out the world and they are totally self-possessed. And
Joe Garagiola used to repeat. I'm sorry.
No, you go ahead.
Oh, no, Joe Garagiola used to repeat that poem on the baseball world of Joe Garagiola, how the family saw the ball player versus how the manager or the management saw the ball player. And one of the lines I remember is to his wife, he's built like a Greek god and he's proportioned like a statue. To his manager, he moves like a monument and he runs like a statue.
That's great. That's great. Last time you were on, Joe Garagiola passed away right before that. And I didn't ask you. It wasn't the time to ask you. You're a Dodger fan from way back. You're a human being, this, that, and the other thing. You love Joe Garagiola. His career was somewhat tainted with questions about his relationship with Jackie Robinson and whether or not he spiked him, whether or not he spiked him intentionally.
Mm-hmm.
Can you give me some insight as to how you feel about that, or what really went down, or did he do these things and change as a human being after that?
I think given, is any one person 100% wonderful? Of course not. Is there somebody out there, if they're still around anymore, who has a very bad Vin Scully story? Probably. I think, I think Robinson, when he was playing, when Ricky said, okay, you can be yourself now, he would anger a number of people. And I mean, he was a very serious player and took the game very seriously and combative, which, you respect in a guy. We're not talking violence, but a guy who's playing as hard as he possibly can. From what I understand, from what I have read, it's before my time, but both men, did say it went on. When DeRocher was coaching third for the Giants as a manager and Robinson was playing third, they would say some horrible things to one another, things that you just can't print, and a lot of it had to do with Robinson's comments about his relationship with Lorraine Day, and they had a brutal skirmish, about that. I mean, I think it was largely broken up, but I think a lot of that went on back then, and people were, getting into each other's skin, and I think and Joe was, a brash, proud Italian from St. Louis, and some of that went on. I think men matured over time. And were either one of them right in what they did? No, but that's how baseball was played then. It was you did everything you could to win, which is why you rooted for your team.
I can remember hearing stories of DeRocha screaming at Robinson, racial epithets that are, I wouldn't even think, let alone say out loud. And he's screaming
and one
at
time
him.
he turned to Mom.
He looks up and there's Hank Thompson.
Exactly. Exactly.
You might have been the one that told me that story. And that they both kind of looked at each other, and it was just like,
and Hank Thompson,
where are
was
we?
double for me, Skip.
Yeah, what is this about? It was a horrible situation that Robinson was in. I had to ask you that question. I'm sorry.
Oh no, that's perfectly okay. Listen,
I know how much he means to you.
Well, listen. Don't deify a man. I learned that long ago. I mean, I was one of those kids who bought Bull 4, and when I first started to read about Mickey Mantle and some of the things Mickey was doing, at first it bothered me, but after maybe a couple months later, I started to laugh at it because, regrettably, we're human.
Yeah, we all are that. No question. Thank you, Tony.
Thank you, Dig.
I always enjoy your company on the air and off the air. We do a lot of communicating back and forth on Facebook, and
we do. And I'm so pleased to always listen to your wonderful offerings. And I am, pray for my memory. I am going to give you the contact information of Carmen Fanzone. You will have a great time with him.
That's terrific. You've introduced me to so many boys. You got to talk to Jim Gasker. I came right back at you and gave you a name of somebody who I'd interviewed.
Oh, Jim is wonderful. He's an old-time ball player.
What? Wow. That was knowing him was really cool. Keep being a fan of Comfortably Zoned.
You better believe it.
Being a fan of Tony D'Angelo. You are absolutely terrific. And
thank you, and the same goes here.
Thank you again.
We'll
talk when we do, and I'm going to, as I do on most of the shows that I do in my name only, I end them. I don't want to take anybody else down with me. I just battleships. Here comes Tyko with his mouth hanging out there again. But I'm going to end the episode this way. I'm going to implore you, shamelessly, by the way, I do this. I implore you to keep your dreams wet, keep your humor dry, keep your children out of military recruiting offices. Just to be on the safe side, keep your kids off the laps of clerics that wear dresses. And if you do all those things, it may work out for you. May not. You may listen. You may not listen. I put it out there. I get it. That's all I can do.
There's a lot of wisdom in what you say.
Some make the same mistake Sunday after Sunday.
What did Ross Perot say? You want to define an idiot, do the same thing twice and expect a different result?
Right. We're all idiots on some respects, I guess.
We sure are.
I'm looking into my own history a little bit. I've made a few mistakes over and over again. But you know what? You do what you can.
I liked Ross. I actually
results.
voted for him until he started seeing little green men under the bed.
Who was that?
Ross Perot.
Oh, Ross. Oh, that's right. Well, Ross was an admiral at one. Was Ross the admiral? No, it was Jimmy Carter that was.
Jimmy Carter was, he was Annapolis. Yes.
He might have been. Was he an admiral too?
I don't think he went up that far.
Yeah. Well, speaking of seeing people, he saw burning bushes and stuff like that. And, I think there was a rabbit that he chased around for a while. We all have our thing. He's complicated. Let's just leave it at that. Yeah. Thanks, Tony. We'll catch you on the flip-flop.
Thanks so much. Bye now.
Be good. Be good, everybody. Keep on keeping on.